Hey everybody, this is Dr. Glenn and welcome to our Facebook Live today where we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is this whole thing that's been going on for the last 60, 70 years, chasing cholesterol around and statin drugs and all that kind of stuff. And what prompted this is Sunday I was reading the newspaper. I was actually reading the London Telegraph, but they always have some good reviews on books and things. And so this book that I've got up here on the screen, Dr. Malhotra, whatever you say it, they reviewed his book and interviewed him and everything. And this fellow is a cardiologist, and he and another cardiologist in the UK, they just published this book about a statin-free life. And, I thought, you know what? I like to talk about this subject, and this is a great opportunity to bring up a few things. And so I thought that today we would talk about this whole idea of statins and what they do and what they can do in a bad way, in a negative way, and where this whole idea came from. Because a lot of people think that this is, a settled science. Well, it's not either. And so I'm going to talk to you today about a few things. This the Where this thing first began, where it first came from, is something called the Framingham Heart Study. And this was a heart study that was first done, as a matter of fact, Framingham, I got a little sign right here. Framingham is a town in Massachusetts. And the very first Framingham study was done back in the late 1940s, where they took a bunch of people and, they were looking at heart disease and cholesterol and all this sort of stuff. And what ends up happening quite often, and it's just the way research is done, is people pull out the stuff that they like, that supports the position that they want. And a lot of times they leave out things that are either contrary to what they want or are very important or whatever. Along with the Framingham heart study is another thing, and I'm going to show you a picture of um, one of the research guys that was behind this, Ansel Keys. There's something called the Seven Nations Study or the Seven Country Study, where Dr. Keys went around. We'll get to that. But so this whole thing started in this place called Framingham, Massachusetts. What you don't hear about is, in looking at the Framingham Heart Study, and I've got some steps, a few things up here that I want to kind of refer to. But before I do, let me go back to my little book right there. One of the things that the doctor says in this book is that cholesterol is a useless biomarker in terms of predicting someone's risk of heart disease, and therefore we shouldn't obsess about lowering it. Instead, he believes that there are better markers that we can use. As a matter of fact, this happens quite often here in the office, especially when we start to talk to people about bringing down their carbohydrates and bringing up their fats, and people, oh my gosh, we can't do that. But cholesterol will go up and then you'll like spontaneously explode or something like that. Well, what we have found is that there is a huge misinformation out there about cholesterol. There's also a big industry behind it. And I'm not trying to be necessarily cynical, but what we do know is that Big Pharma does an awful lot to run treatment protocols here in the US. So what I want to do is kind of go over this a little bit. One of the things that this Framingham study showed, not relative to heart disease, which is not what I do. What we do here at the Carroll Institute is we do cognitive decline and Alzheimer's and things like that. But at the same time they were looking at hearts in this, they also went in and looked at cognitive performance. And what they noticed is that in 789 men, I've got some notes right here because I want to get all the numbers right, and 1,105 women who were free from dementia, had not had strokes, they receive twice a year total cholesterol measurements over a period of 16 to 18 years. And here's what they found. As a matter of fact, I think I made myself a little graphic right here. Yeah, patients with what we call desirable TC, or total cholesterol levels, that is cholesterol below 200. Now, I can tell you this. When I was in school back in the 80s, uh, total cholesterol normal was 2 to 220. And then, of course, everybody's chasing heart disease, thinking cholesterol causes heart disease. So they lowered it to 200. And now what they'll tell you is that it should be below 180. And I've even had doctors tell their patients that they'd like to see them have it below 140 or 120. This is ridiculous. But the research actually shows that when you have cholesterol below 200, the participants in this study performed less well than participants with borderline high total cholesterol, that is between 200 and 239, and participants with high cholesterol, that is cholesterol above 240. So what we actually see is people with higher cholesterol than what is considered optimal right now actually have better brain and cognitive function. But try to get your doctor to listen to that when you tell them that you're going to do a keto diet or something. You might as well be trying to hit the moon with a bow and arrow, because they just don't want to hear this stuff. So let me get some of these things off the screen now. Oh, by the way, relative to this, you can go in and you can research this. And one of the things you'll find is that the FDA, under pressure from Big Pharma and the American Heart Association, actually changed the warning labels on statin drugs. What the labels used to do is they would warn people that statin drugs, that some people have developed memory loss and confusion while taking statin drugs. Now, get this. These side effects reverse once you stop taking the medication. Now, think about that for just a moment. If your doctor wants you to take statin drugs until the day you die, and the drugs cause memory loss, dementia, and cognitive decline until you stop taking them, I guess what that means is that after you die and you're not taking statin drugs anymore, your memory will get better. This makes absolutely no sense, but this is the kind of stuff that we see in research all of the time. What do I got here? One of the things that I want to point out is that, and this has just changed fairly recently. It used to be that Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia were the third leading cause of death. Now what you can see is that behind ischemic heart disease, ischemia means loss of oxygen, all right, that Alzheimer's disease is now the second leading cause of death in the United States, or in high-income countries, that is the West. And if you'll look at it here, I don't know if you can see my little marker. I don't think you can. But if you'll look at it, the white dot is what it was in 2000, and the blue dot is what it was in 2019. And what you'll see if you look at the heart disease is coming down, but Alzheimer's has gone way, way up in the last 20 years. And one of the reasons that it's gone way, way up is because of our diet and lifestyle. Got another screenshot here that I want to show you. Statins have also been linked to type 2 diabetes. And get something right here. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. Come on, get a little bigger. Okay, let me move it right up there. Here's what we see. Now, remember that Dr. Bredesen out at UCLA has demonstrated that the two primary drivers of cognitive decline and dementia of all types is inflammation and blood sugar regulation problems. High-dose simvastatin was associated with a 44% increase in the risk of developing diabetes, while low-dose simvastatin, the increased risk was 28%. High-dose atorvastatin was linked to a 37% increase in diabetes risk. Now, if the two main causes of Alzheimer's and dementia are inflammation and blood sugar regulation, and statin drugs have been associated with an increase in cognitive decline, maybe we should reevaluate if we should be taking this stuff at all. Let me pull these things down. So when I first started looking into this stuff, it was kind of like a little research adventure, and I found this book, and it's called The Big Fat Surprise, and I can highly recommend this book to anybody who wants to read about and learn about this whole progress of blaming heart disease on fat intake, where it all started and everything like that. But what I want to show you here is, I got lots of little graphics to show you today. Looking at the incidence or the death from heart disease in the US starting in 1900 and going up to 2010, you can see that there was a huge increase. There was a peak in the 1960s, 70s, 50, in that area right there. And then it's actually been coming down. Now, very interesting thing. A lot of people are not aware of this, but there was a book that was published. Let me get this out of the way and I'll show you the book. I don't know if any of you have ever read this. Upton Sinclair was a novelist, and back in 1909, he released this book called The Jungle. And The Jungle talked about the stockyards and slaughterhouses in Chicago. And it had such an impact on the culture at the time that meat consumption in the United States dropped 50%. All right, so let me go back now and bring this picture back up for you again. And there we go. Okay, so here's what happened. People started eating less meat. Then the Depression came along and people couldn't afford to eat meat. So if you weren't eating a lot of meat, what were you eating? Well, you were eating a lot more grain and stuff like that. Then after the Depression, then there was World War II. After World War II, and you can kind of see what's going on there, is they started tying heart disease to cholesterol, and so people kept their meat consumption down, and they kept on eating this stuff that we now call heart-healthy whole grains. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that, where did this whole idea come from? Well, here's this Russian scientist fellow named Nikolai Anikachof. And Nikolai, he did some research in the early 1950s where he took a whole bunch of rabbits and he fed them high-fat, high-protein diets, and they all developed heart disease and died. That doesn't sound too good. So he got this research published, and this guy here, Ancel Keys, if any of you have ever heard of K rations, what they used to feed the military, they were developed by Ancel Keys. And Ancel Keys was a physiology professor at the University of Minnesota. He was also sort of an academic bully. And as a matter of fact, there was a time when if you tried to publish anything that disagreed with the party line, the hypothesis that heart disease was caused by fat intake, you basically ruined your career and you couldn't get it published in any of the reputable journals, the peer-reviewed journals. So what happens is Key gets a hold of Nikolai's research, and then, I got another picture for you, Eisenhower had a heart attack. Well, the other fellow there in the picture with Eisenhower is Dr. Dudley White. And Dr. Dudley White was a cardiologist, and he was Ike's cardiologist. And Keys and White were like buds. And so Keys gets a hold of White and says, hey, I just read this research out of the Soviet Union that says eating high-fat, high-protein diets will give you heart disease. And so what does White do? He takes away Ike's bacon and eggs and, cut his fat down and all that kind of stuff. Now, here's what happened. Nobody realized at the time that rabbits are vegetarians. And they don't have the enzyme to break down fat and protein like carnivores do, like humans and things like that. So what Nikolai eventually did later in the 50s is he went back and redid his research, and this time he did it with a bunch of dogs. And he fed the dogs high-fat, high-protein diet, and none of them died. And but the problem was by this time the cat, so to speak, was out of the bag, and everybody started running around chasing fat in our diet, and telling you low fat. You got to, And I'm telling you, if you remember back in the '80s, it was like you couldn't get anything that wasn't low fat, when actually the fat is one of the best things in the food. We also were taught for a long time that it was calories that made you gain weight. And I just listened to a book by a physicist, and he was trying to use an analogy to explain something, and he talked about calories. Well, calories don't cause you to gain weight. Carbohydrates do. See, there are three macro food groups, right? There's protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Your body processes them differently, but we didn't know that for a long, long time. And we just thought calories, if you ate too many calories and you didn't exercise enough and burn them off, that you would gain weight. And the way you lose weight is you eat less calories and you work out more. But the problem is this: the body doesn't treat all calories the same. Now, when you look at weight or by volume, fat has more calories in it than, say, carbohydrates. So they thought, well, obviously, then you shouldn't be eating fat, because fat not only is bad for your heart, but it also makes you gain weight. Well, what happens is the body treats fat, protein, and carbohydrates differently. So if, by the way, if you've been having trouble struggling to try and lose some weight, cut out the carbs, because when you eat excessive carbs, your body turns the excess fuel, it stores it in your climate controlled storage facility, which is, it's not a spare tire. That is a climate controlled storage facility that's around your middle and in your rear end and your hips and wherever else it likes to go. So that's where this whole thing started, was with Nikolai and his faulty research that got read by Ansel Keys, that then went on to advise Dudley White to tell Ike to stop eating bacon and eggs. So, what really does cause the heart disease? Well, I've got another diagram for you. And this diagram was referred to in the article that I mentioned that I read on Sunday about Dr. Mahorta's new book about the statin-free life. And let me kind of explain this to you. Coronary artery disease, or coronary artery plaquing, or heart disease, whatever word you want to use for it, is actually an inflammatory process. It is not a lipid or fat process. So what happens is when you have the artery inflamed, it becomes weakened and it will tear. So it's like a piece of elastic that gets old and worn out, and it can tear in between the bands. And when the artery tears like that, what happens is the blood will leak out of it. So the word that's used is you will bleed out. So you bleed out of the artery into the surrounding tissue. Well, that's not good. So what does your body do? It comes along and it makes a patch to go over the hole in the artery. And that patch is made out of plaque. So when you see a lot of plaquing and in the artery, it's not a sign that you've been eating too much fat. It's a sign that you are too inflamed. And what is it that causes inflammation? Well, the number one thing that causes inflammation is carbohydrates. So what we've actually been doing over the last 50, 60 years is we've been actually making the problem worse by eating these high carb, low-fat diets. Now, when I say you need to increase your fats, I don't mean garbage fats, junk fats. And we did a talk a few weeks ago about fats, healthy fats for your diet. What you want to do is get rid of those trans fats and keep the saturated fats down to a low, but you want to get plenty of your mono fats and things like that in there. So let's go back to this diagram right here. Well, what you can see is when you eat too much carbohydrate, your blood sugar will go up. Makes sense, doesn't it? Eat a lot of sugar. Remember, carbohydrate is just a fancy word for sugar. So when you eat a lot of sugar, it doesn't matter if it's bread, pasta, popsicles, it doesn't make a difference where the sugar comes from, your blood sugar will go up. What does the body do when the blood sugar goes up? Well, it says, well, this is not good because if you leave it up, you can go blind and your toes will fall off. That's not good. So what happens is your body releases insulin. Insulin's job is to take the sugar that's in your blood and go put it in a cell so you can use it for fuel. So it's like when you go to the gas station to put some fuel in your car, you take the nozzle, the hose. So the hose is like the insulin. It takes the fuel from the underground tank at the gas station and it puts it in your car so you can use it to burn and drive your car around and go wherever you want to go. Well, that's what insulin does. Insulin will take the fuel, the sugar that is in the blood, and stick it in a cell so you can burn it for fuel. Now, what happens if you don't need any fuel? Well, your body is very efficient, and what it does is it saves the excess fuel in your storage facility, like we just talked about. Now, the other thing that will happen is if you keep going and knocking on the cell's door and saying, hey, you want some sugar? And the cell goes, golly, will you please go away? I don't need it right now. He's sitting on his rear end talking in a microphone and looking at a camera. He's not on his bicycle or swimming around or running up and down the stairs or whatever. So it doesn't need the fuel. But we've had high carbohydrate diets for the last 70 years thinking that that was going to help us with heart disease. So what happens is we now have obesity and diabetes. But what happens with the insulin is this. You keep knocking on the cell's door saying, here, you want some more sugar? And it goes, no, I don't need any sugar. So you develop a resistance to the insulin. If somebody walked up to your house and knocked on the door and said, here, you want to buy some brooms or something? You go, no, go away. And you shut the door and he knocks on the door. Pretty soon you would stop answering the door. This is called insulin resistance. This has been getting a lot of press lately, and you'll hear about it in ads on television and stuff like that. This is one of the keys to why, if you're having trouble stabilizing your blood sugar or losing weight, you have to reverse the insulin resistance, or you have to become what's called fat adapted, where you can start burning off your stored fat again. So what happens here is when you become insulin resistant, it causes an inflammatory process. This happens everywhere, including in your brain. Your brain will become inflamed. So what's one of the best things that you can do to reduce insulin resistance? Bring those carbs down. Stop worrying about the fat. Remember this. Your brain is made out of primarily fat. Okay? About 60 to 70% of your brain is fat. Half of it is cholesterol. If Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia are now the second leading cause of death in the West, then maybe taking drugs to reduce our cholesterol is not a good idea. And since heart disease is not a fat-based disease, but an inflammatory disease, then maybe it would be a good idea to bring those excessive carbohydrates down and bring the good quality fats up. And that's just what this fellow was talking about in the book. But I'll tell you what, you start messing with people's ideology and you get lots and lots of pushback. All right. So you need to be careful how you talk. If you want to talk to your doctor about this, you need to kind of, ask him what his position on this is. But a high fat Mediterranean style of diet. Now, what does that actually mean? All right. It means you're eating lots of fruits and vegetables. Now, fruits you got to be careful with because fruits can have a lot of sugar in them. So you want to be eating low sugar vegetables, okay? I mean fruits, all right? And vegetables as well. Root vegetables have a lot more sugar in them than other types of vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and stuff like that. But you want to be using good quality olive oil for your cooking instead of vegetable oils or saturated oils or polyunsaturated fats, things like that. You want to be using olive oil and good quality oils. You can cook with that. You can cook with avocado oil. You can cook with coconut oil. You can cook with a lot of things like that and get those bad fats out. The other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you're eating good quality proteins. All right. And when I say good quality, I mean what we're finding is that the quality of the food that you eat is super important. It's yes, you want to bring your carbs down and your good quality fats and proteins up, but you also want to make sure that they're good, that they're clean. In other words, uh, you know, what was a herd like? That they made the cheese from? Were they giving them growth hormones and antibiotics and things like that, or were they free? Grass fed and all this sort of stuff. So you want to be looking at the quality of the food that you eat. So I know we've been over an awful lot of stuff here, and it's just barely even scratching the surface. So we'll come back and we'll talk about some of these other things again. But what I want to encourage you with today is to, if you need to, go back and look at one of my previous Facebook Lives where we talk about good quality fats for your brain. I also talk about intermittent fasting. We talk about how to bring the carbohydrates down. When you bring your carbs down and your good quality fats up, your brain will love you for it. You'll get slimmer because you'll start to burn off some of that stored fat that you have accumulated around the middle. And what will happen is your inflammation level will come down. Now, one thing that I didn't even bring up here is, they say that LDL is the bad fat and HDL is the good fat. What we now know is that diet alone is not what drives LDL, the bad fat, up. LDL primarily responds to inflammation. And the best way to bring your inflammation down is to bring your carbohydrates down. This is completely different than what you've been told. The best thing you can do to save your heart is not to eat more carbs and less fat. It's to bring the fat up, the good quality fat up, and bring those carbohydrates down. Lower your inflammation. Your heart will love you for it, and your brain will love you for it. So I hope this has been helpful for you. If you want to ask any questions, always feel free to send us an email. Also, the contact info is right there, the phone number, and on the website. We offer something called a free discovery phone call, where you can talk with one of our certified health brain coaches about what's going on with you and find out if we're a good place to help you. So I hope you have a great day today, and thanks for being with us, and I'll see you next week.